college certainly requires students to stretch as writers. It forces them to become critical thinkers. In this next segment, we hear about an interesting assignment in a political science class. The assignment was about the politics of the end of the world. Carolee McGrath sat down with Paul Musgrave, assistant professor of political science at UMass, to learn more.
About 3 or 4 years ago, I started thinking about the conversations I'd been having with undergraduates and thinking about the world that they were going to be going into. And I recognized two things. First, a lot of students at the time, a lot of young folks, were really interested in dystopian novels. And you think about things like The Hunger Games, and this is where movies are coming from, it's where books are coming from. There's kind of a sense that people were already thinking about the end of the world as something that was present in their lives, or at least in their reading material. And then I also thought that, I'm pretty sure that the world that they'll be living in is not the world that we're going to be living in right now. You can think about climate change, you can think about political traumas, you can think about any of these things. But even, in our lifetimes, the Cold War has come, the Cold War is gone, the internet wasn't a thing, now it is. There's so many things that can change. And I started to think, well, what is the politics? What are the ways that societies change and adapt and respond to these sorts of big transformations that happen all the time, but which don't get debated with the same sort of fervor as Medicare for all or tax cuts? I wanted to have a course in a space where students could really get into these issues and really try to understand how change happens and affects them, and how some of the biggest changes of all, might really affect their lives.
What were some of the topics that they picked?
So we sat down and we worked. I developed some preliminary topics, and then the students chose what they wanted to do. And I decided to focus the course. I teach at UMass, we're in Massachusetts, to focus on Massachusetts. More than 4 centuries of history since Europeans came here. That's a lot of things to talk about. So one was how Massachusetts colonists, the Pilgrims, dealt with the native population when they arrived, because that was an end of the world for the native population, but obviously the Pilgrims, the Puritans, also thought that the end of the world was something that was imminent for them. They had a very strong religious belief. There was a 19th century group of religious believers, the Millerites, who actually set a date for the end of the world in 1843 and then 1844. Then there was the Cold War, where the end of the world became something that was really imminent for people living in Massachusetts and throughout the United States, and actually changed the way that people in the Pioneer Valley lived, where we had a major nuclear base, just up the river from where we are now. And then finally, global warming, which is something that is already beginning to change how people in Massachusetts, how places in the coast are living and adapting to weather-related changes.
And so what types of things did they do in their projects? Did they do interviews? Were they doing writing?
They did so much. So at the beginning of the course, I told the students that anything that was legal was possible.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they had as much freedom. Stay legal.
Yes.
That was a really big concern for me.
That's a big one.
It is a big one, but it's also a much different environment than what you normally have in classes, where you have all these rules and regulations designed to keep people inside of a box. And working with students over the past 10 years, I've recognized that they're really talented if you give them a little bit of direction and a lot of freedom. So they went out and they did tons of research. They did site visits to a former nuclear command bunker, which is now part of the UMass library system. They went and they did a tour of a museum of the praying Indians out in Natick. They talked to people who had been actually part of U.S. missile forces in in the United States during the Cold War. And they also interviewed people from Harvard professors to members of Congress about the sort of changes that they were seeing. And one group of folks for their podcast, even, I didn't know they could do this, composed and recorded their own soundtrack for the episode, which was really something that just elevated their presentation of, a world that was pretty remote from our own.
This must have been a really great project for them to have some freedom on.
Well, that's what I hope. And, I think it was more fun for them at the end. And there was definitely some trepidation there as they were figuring out what you can do. But we tried to work with them. We tried to work with the students to show them all of the resources that they had, and to also talk about how you structure stories. And there were great tutorials done by folks from NPR online on how to actually structure journalism. And for students who might have a lot of knowledge about some theory or about certain areas, actually learning how you produce something that will be released to the world, that will really have a story and a message and a takeaway that you want to share with the world. that was something that I think was really valuable for them.
What did they learn about the politics of talking about the end of the world? I know in many different situations that you mentioned, there's always politics behind it. And of course, we've heard it recently that if we don't change things in 12 years, the world's going to end. How did they walk away with maybe a different perspective looking at the historical context of it?
I think one of the big things that the students learned was that whatever we think of as the world, it's always in the process of changing, and that means it's in the process of, in a sense, ending. So the students who looked at relations between the original colonists in the Massachusetts Bay Colony and the praying Indians, who were natives who had been converted to Christianity and who were then kind of betrayed by the colonists during a series of wars with natives. This was something where beliefs about the end of the world motivated people to come to Massachusetts, to convert Indians, to become part of Christianity, and they were then kind of abandoned. And I think that was something that really taught them that strong ideas might not be enough, that there's also a lot of negotiation about how people approach and how people can even cause the end of the world. And then folks who were part of the group that looked at how coastal communities are responding to climate change, I think it was interesting because their generation has been really raised to believe that this is something that is imminent, but the pace of change, the pace of adaptation, even as the physical manifestations get ever more obvious, it's just not happening. And so I think that they learned that there's room for people to take action, there's room for people to adapt, but there's also a lot of really big subjects in the world that don't necessarily have a happy ending.
Right, but it certainly is a little bit, less, daunting to think that, yes, you're talking about change. Things changed. The end of the world as you knew it, as a song from the 80s sings, it might be different. But certainly, in all of these circumstances, life went on.
Well, so that's the question. I mean, part of the underlying message of the class was you can actually do real things. I mean, this is a podcast that we have put up. You can find it on Stitcher. You can find it on other podcast indexing sites. And the idea was to tell students that you can really do something in the real world. And by setting these stories, by having them investigate how people had dealt with these problems, my hope was that even though they might recognize that there are problems that are serious, there are still ways for people to actually take action and at least try to make a difference.